Hi, Jeremy here, Modern Vitality. In today's video, we are making healing broths. Specifically, I'm going to show you how to make a bone broth. Now, I've got our ingredients here, and I'm just going to go over a couple things that you need to know. One, vegetarians. If you're a vegetarian, you can still make a broth. You're not going to use animal bones, right? But you're going to lean more towards vegetables and also mushrooms, things like that. You want to get some savory flavor in there, maybe even seaweeds, depending on what you want to experiment with. Broth is a concept. It's not one fixed thing. Right? That's kind of how cooking, all of cooking is. When we get stuck on these recipes and this kind of, I have to have everything exactly like the book, it's limiting. So set yourself free here. We're going to explore broth as a concept. I'm going to be showing bone broth, but if you're a vegetarian, modify it. If you're allergic to something, modify it. Okay, there's no wrong way to do this. Another thing we want to start to get is this idea of becoming the kind of person who has a little stash of things for your broth. Because a lot of times, some of the stuff we use, like for example, we have leeks, right? The green part of the leeks, I use the white parts in a stir fry or something like that. And I've started to train my mind to save these things that maybe otherwise would have gotten thrown out or composted. And you're going to wind up with a freezer full of kind of random odds and ends stuff. Like my wife will tell you, when she opens up the freezer, all these little things that I've been saving and hoarding, they kind of come out. So just keep track of your little collection of extra stuff. This is not an excuse to save rotten food or anything that's gone bad. You just want to save sometimes the things you wouldn't use for a normal meal. They're still really good parts of the plant that you can use for a broth. So you'll start learning about this. Another one too, mushrooms, right? Maybe you made shiitakes and maybe you've done something where you've cut the stem off, the shiitakes, because you were going to do like a fry saute kind of deal and you didn't need the stem. Well, you can start saving these. Just throw them in the freezer. And then when it's time to make a broth, you can look in your freezer, just start to find all these little odds and ends that you've got. So today I'm going to be showing you, we've got carrots, right? Pretty straightforward. Celery, we got onions, and I've got some leek stems, and we also have bay leaves. I got a little splash of vinegar here. There's salt if you want to use salt. And it's going to be pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So don't overcomplicate this. One other thing I'll share with you real quick is that we have a produce brush, right? Maybe you're scrubbing your produce off and cleaning it. If you're getting organic stuff, that's great. You don't have to have this perfectly spotless for broth. And actually, I think, personally, things like this at the bottom of the celery, where there's a little bit of soil from an organic farm, local if you can do it, right? But something where it's not all pesticides and sprayed, you can be getting some of the natural microbiome, especially if it's local from your local region. We're supposed to eat a little bit of dirt, right? That's the secret in this hygienic world that we live in, is we're supposed to eat a little bit of dirt. So having broth is a way to get some of that in. So don't go crazy when you're cleaning your veggies. All right, so let's cut these up and then we'll get cooking. So we've got our carrots. I usually don't put the stems in there, and I usually take just the tail end of that off too. Don't need that. And then we just cut them into little chunks. You can cut bigger chunks if you want. It doesn't really matter. It's going to be cooking for a long, long time, so they will get cooked. So we got our carrots. Just put them in the bowl here. So we got celery here. Watch your fingers. We got the leeks. And let's get to the onion. And we're good to go. So we got a big old pot. I like cast iron. It's huge. You want to make a big batch of this and it'll last you a long time. So we're just going to get the pot on the burner and we'll throw just a little bit. You don't want to drown this thing, but we'll just throw a little bit of coconut oil in here just to help the veggies brown up. So we'll toss that in there. And then we'll get there we go. Then we'll get the burner on. And you basically want to think about the bottom of the pot as just like a saute area. Just like if you were cooking something, making a stir fry or just browning vegetables up. So we'll get this going, and I'm actually going to put the heat on pretty high just to get it started. And I want to get these veggies in here. So I'm just taking everything, popping it in, very easy. And we're going to let that get heated up, get warm, and we want to start to brown these. And it's going to start to smell really good in your house. So I'm just going to check by every couple minutes and give them a little stir, make sure nothing's sticking to the bottom of the pot while I get that browning happening. So these are starting to brown up nicely. Let's go to the next step. So you'll start collecting, like for bone broth, I have bones. And when we make chicken, or in this case, there was a duck. I did a duck last week. You just start to save the carcass. You just start to save these things. And it's one of those things where our culture's kind of lost a lot of this, and I think it's important to bring this back, where we're using as much of the animal as we can. It's respectful, right? So the vegetarians watching this are like, don't eat the duck, right? But some people do eat the duck, so we want to at least use as much of that as we can. So I've got like a duck carcass here. It's got the bones. Right in the pot it goes. You'll also start to save up other things, like if you made chicken legs or something like that. We use these little stasher bags in the freezer. They're really great and they're reusable, and you'll get inside, like you can see, it's just a bunch of frozen bones. I've just been saving them. So these all go in the pot. And for bone broth, if you're gonna make a proper bone broth, you wanna have a lot of bones in there. And this is gonna help you get all the minerals, the collagen, all this stuff out. Because if you only have a few little bones in there, you're probably gonna wind up with a more thin, watery broth when you're done. And the real test, which we'll do this later when this is done, but the real test is you want your bone broth to be jiggly, like Jell-O, when it's cool. So you wanna make sure that you've got all that in there in the first place. So if you're getting watery broth, it's probably because you didn't put enough bones in. So there are the bones. This is still cooking, and now we're gonna add the secret ingredient here, which most people don't have access to this unless you start to talk to your farmers. So what do we have? Chicken feet. Seriously, again, we're using the whole animal. We're trying to respect the life and the whole nose to tail process, right? So start talking to farmers, your local farmers, go to farmers markets, look online, there's all kinds of resources, and you wanna start asking, do you have chicken feet? What do you do with the chicken feet? Because they usually have them, and they have them in actually big, this is what it looks like when I talk to a farmer and I say, hey, can I get some chicken feet? It's a big old brick, right? So one of the logistics here is that you don't want to put this much chicken feet in your broth. So one of the best things to do is to thaw that brick out, right? I'm just gonna give this a little stir. Thaw that brick out, and then group it into like 5 or 6 chicken feet, and then kind of rewrap those and freeze those again, so that when it's time to do the broth, you can take your one little pack you made and thaw it out, and it's enough for your one pot. So chicken feet, you know, it may be a little odd at first to start looking at this, but you got to remember this is where we came from as humans, is we would just make use of what nature had. We didn't just go to the store and only get chicken breasts and that was it, right? And we sure weren't eating chicken nuggets that were just made out of weird pig paste. It's real parts of real animals, and the feet, you know, they get thrown out a lot or they get wasted, but they're full of collagen. They're full of it. And collagen, of course, is very good for helping you heal and repair your body. There's a lot of studies on that. You can look at the power of bone broth for gut health. You can look at skin health. You can look at a lot of these things. So you want to take advantage of this, get talking to your local farmers, make a network, and then once you get the big brick, right, thaw it out. Trust me on this, because I've had to deal with, you don't want to deal with that when you're trying to make the broth. Thaw it out into smaller packs, refreeze those, and then you're ready to go. So the next thing we're going to do is add a couple more ingredients. We've got bay leaves, right? So a couple bay leaves. The thing with the bone broth is it's very tempting to start putting everything in here. Like if you have some ginger, you know, or different stems of different herbs, it's really tempting to start adding a bunch of stuff, which you can do. For me, I like to have the bone broth be a standard thing that I can then modify for the different meals. So this broth might turn into a chili, a stew, a pho, like a soup, a miso soup, a Thai soup. So I don't want to have a really strong flavor profile on the broth itself. I try to keep it pretty neutral. You might put a little bit of salt in there, right? That's fine. You add what you like. But I try to give myself options later, so this broth will be relatively neutral. So there's that. The next step is to put a bunch of water in. So we get the water in there, and I'm leaving about an inch at the top. And then our last little ingredient is a splash of vinegar, and that's just going to help pull some more of the minerals and nutrition out of the bones. Then we just cover it up, crank the heat up to as high as it'll go, and we keep an eye on it because once it starts to boil, we want to turn it down and simmer. So our broth is at a very strong boil. This is way too much. We want to turn it down. I'm going just over low. We want to simmer this. So I'm going to keep the lid off until I see that it's calmed down, and then I'll put the lid back on and let it simmer for about 4 hours. So we got a nice low simmer. We want to go low and slow. So I'm just going to put the lid on and keep it there for about 4 hours minimum, and you'll get to know your stove. Different stoves have different settings, and you just want to make sure it's not all steaming and blowing out of the pot, but you also want to make sure that it didn't stop bubbling. So the first few times you're making the broth, you're going to want to learn your stove and just check on it periodically. So we've let the broth simmer for 4 hours, 6 hours, something like that. You want to let it go a long time. And of course, you got to check and top up the water level in case it starts to steam off. You don't want anything burning in there. But at this point, I'm going to be straining out a lot of the big stuff into a bowl because we can actually reuse this and make another broth. So I've just got a slotted spoon and I'm just taking out some of the bigger chunks. So once you've got a fair amount of the bones and the carrots and all that strained out, then you can use, this is probably the easiest way to do this. This is a little clip-on strainer that my wife found, and you can attach it to the pot so that you can pour through it and it'll keep all of the bones and carrots and vegetables and stuff still in there, and just the broth will come out. So once you get this on there, and you want to make sure you got a pretty good seal, otherwise it's going to leak out the bottom, then you grab a jar. And you just pour it off into the jar. Sometimes you make a little mess, it's okay. And we'll let this cool down to room temperature and then put it in the fridge, and that's where we're going to store it. So I'll put a lid on and all that, and then we'll just save it for when we need to make a soup, a stew, anything like that. If you're struggling with a complex chronic health condition like Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, mold exposure, chronic fatigue syndrome, anything autoimmune, any of this post-viral fatigue, any of these knotty, complex chronic conditions, you don't have to do it alone. We've got a fantastic group. It's people all over the world. We're international. It's free to join as a guest. I'm in there every single day answering questions. You can learn a lot about your health, not just cooking, right? We're looking at specific stage-by-stage healing processes to untangle these knotty conditions. We're also looking at specific herbs, breathing exercises. It's a great place to be. Everybody's very positive. There's a lot of support. So I'd encourage you, you can find the link to apply. It's around here somewhere, probably in the description of the video. And if I see your application, it looks really good, I'll get you in just as soon as I can. There may be a bit of a wait because we do tend to fill up. All right, let's get you feeling better. Cheers.